I'm still sick, so I sound like a squeaky toy. It is so funny to see that as we keep looking at the same 4 polygons some of the League of Legends champions still have, other Riot games are redefining what those champions even stand for. Be it the cool designs from Legends of Runeterra, the new HD models from Wild Rift, or even the cool upgrades from games like the Ruined King. Not that one. And over the last year, there's been a lot of updates we didn't get a chance to talk about. So in today's video, we are talking League of Legends champions. But cooler. At this point everyone knows that Legends of Runeterra is godly at exploring the universe, but also showing us what the champions could be up to. At times, it might all be what-if scenarios, but at the very least, it is still expanding context. Recently, we got an amazing update for Janna, whose entire new design got based around lore. In other words, this is what Janna should actually look like, despite what people tell you about her pretty form in League of Legends. And we also got some new cards for Nidalee and Vladimir. Though for them, there was no visual update, just some more context for their story. But if we go further back, past the Poro King, which became its own champion, we get to Neeko and Nidalee. Again, when it comes to Neeko, she is nearly identical to what we can see in League of Legends. And even her story is similar here. She is around the Kumungu jungles, hanging out with the local wildlife. In fact, it is the one champion connected to Neeko who got a really cool upgrade. And of course, it's Nidalee. It is a bit of a shame I didn't get to talk about this one when this redesign first came out, because honestly, it is a really good one. Now of course, there will be some people who like the original more, for multiple reasons. But hands down, if you learn about Nidalee's story and you get into her background, you'll see that all of this makes so much more sense than what we got before. You see, Nidalee's story was already rewritten twice in the past, because some of the details in the story never made sense. So now, in the most recent version, Nidalee was a small cub left alone in the Kumungu jungles. There she was adopted by the Paka, which is a cool name for a family of cats. But as she grew up, occasionally she would start transforming into a human. And in fact, sometimes suffering from a fever, and stuck in a state between a human and a cat. She would be lured out of her den by 2 strangers who seemed familiar, likely her original parents. She then had some encounters with the Kilash, who murdered some members of her cat family, and these days she is roaming around, transforming however she wants, and she's taking care of her Paka family. You see, the important part here is that Nidalee is shifting between the 2 forms, but sometimes she also stays in between, which, if you look at what we got in League of Legends, is not really it. And even in her latest story, where she got a nice update, it wasn't exactly there. So, Legends of Runeterra gave us this. A perfect meld of the humans and the Paka. But even cooler than that, not only did the Paka get their own cool Ishtali design. Remember, Ishtal is all about dealing with elemental magic. So it makes sense why they would look a little bit strange like this. But Nidalee's own cat form is far more magical, which is exactly how it should be around Ishtal. And you know what? One day I hope this update makes it to League of Legends as an ASU. Now, outside of this, Legends of Runeterra also solidified some other old designs that came from League of Legends. One of the first ones that got a cool update was Udyr. At that time, Udyr was getting his own VGU in League, so Legends of Runeterra knew they didn't want to go for the old design. So instead, they gave it their own spin and they hit something in between. And I still believe this form is really cool. Then we also got Jax. The cool thing about Jax in Legends of Runeterra is that he finally answered what's happening with the mask. This is the one thing that was always confusing. Because in League, it is just a shadow with a weird mouthpiece. Then the one in splash art made it a bit more medieval. But then the one from the old cinematic made it look like a helmet from a sci-fi. A design that eventually made it into Wild Rift 2. Well, here it was finally revealed what we are looking at. And I have to say, this version makes sense the most, because Jax came from Icathia, a nation of mage warriors who would definitely craft artifacts similar to this mask. And what's awesome is that a similar design will also arrive in League with Jax's VGU. That one should be right behind the corner. And I really mean right behind the corner. Though why the mask has many eyes still remains a mystery. But speaking of many eyes, there is one more champion in Legends of Runeterra I want to mention. Master Yi. This one raised by far the most eyebrows, because this change is quite massive. Besides the 7 lenses of insight, which is just a fancy name for his goggles, it would be pretty hard to guess that this was Master Yi, since everything from his armor to his blade is different. I mean, even his dagger feet are gone. Not to mention that his color palette changed too. Originally he was grey, green and golden, but in this version the grey-silver was removed. And that's for a very simple reason. When you look at Master Yi as an Ionian Blade Master, it makes sense. Ionia doesn't have the clean metal you can see in League of Legends. In fact, this kind of clean metal work doesn't really fit any region in the universe. I mean, Yi still looks like this because this was his original design from 2008. In truth, anything that comes from Ionia should feel and look like it is alive. That's why even their buildings look like they were woven together. That's because they were. They are using elemental weavers to craft everything. They don't cut down trees to make a house. They grow the trees up using magic to look like houses. And that's why this design feels so different. It's because it has all the living curves of the Ionian living design. Not to mention that the Vuju blade itself finally looks like something made in Ionia. With that said, I still totally understand if you don't like this design and you like the original instead. I mean, the jump is pretty massive. But it seems like even in the past, Riot tried to tease Yi's new look. The first hint we got that this was in fact Yi's outdated design was when he got one of his newer stories. There you can see that they already got rid of all the clean shoulder plates, and instead they gave him a curvy design. But this pretty much marks the biggest update in Legends of Runeterra. The rest of the champions are very similar to their original forms. So now, why don't we have a look at Wild Rift? You see, Wild Rift is extremely popular in the East compared to the West. So much so that Riot is actually slowly moving their Wild Rift offices there. But of course, the East has their own cultural censorship, with the biggest one being about skulls and bones. You see, whenever China is covering bones in games, it's not because it would be too gory or too graphic for their audience. It's because their culture is trying to avoid disrespecting the dead. That's the main reason why you can't show the remains of the deceased. And unfortunately, when you have a look at Brand, you could consider him a walking corpse on fire. So what did Wild Rift do? They tried to make him look like an obviously alive man on fire. And that's why they injected youth into him, making him very smooth in the process. And Thresh was met with a similarly smoothing process, just in a bit of a different way. You see, Thresh is a walking skeleton, so in order to make him work in the East, they really had to just completely redesign him. But instead of just giving him a separate model for the East, Riot did something which I find to be really cool. They gave Thresh a lore reason why he can be sexy. Of course, this was part of the entire Ruination storyline, which had its own hiccups. But out of the entire mess, I still believe Unbound Thresh is fine. Anyway, besides these, the champions in Wild Rift look absolutely amazing in many ways. And mostly, it's because all of the HD models all the champions get for Champion Select. But sometimes, besides just bumping up the poly count on the base models, their champions get an extra crispy upgrade. The last time we got to talk about these HD models was about a year ago, in Rift News around the Supreme Cells event. But since then we got quite a few good ones. One of the first ones we got was Warwick, who doesn't look as feral as he should, but that's mostly due to the smooth art style of Wild Rift. I still believe he looks amazing. Though what really made this update cool was the cinematic. Sometimes Wild Rift gets these animated shorts to celebrate new champions. And in the case of Warwick, it actually came with a really cool nod towards his lore. Because the entire trailer is narrated by Singed from the past. It is all lines from the time he was experimenting on him. This one is really worth a watch. We then got Kayn, which, I mean, you know, Rust is really awesome, but at the end of the day, it is just an update to the base model. This one was followed by Aatrox. Here, I really like some of the tiny changes. For example, the fact that his face is a lot paler, which makes him look a lot more metal, and he got some really vibrant colors on all the blood magic. We then got Lilia, which looks nearly identical, though here she looks a little bit younger, or older, I'm really not sure which one. The face just feels off, to be honest. And speaking of faces being off, yeah, I really don't know what's happening here. I remember people joking about her being turned into a Disney character. Yeah, I don't think that's the case. I think it's the smile that is creeping me out. We then got Zeri. Zeri is a newer champion, so she looks nearly the same. And we then got two bundled together. We got Urgot and Twitch. Similar to Warwick, Urgot also stayed similar, though more polished, I guess. But he also got his own trailer, where he and his Sons of Zaun walked up on a rich man to show him that money is worthless. And again, this trailer was amazing. Twitch on the other side.
Hello. You must be here to admire my illustrious collection.
You must be here to take my cheese. I got my own thoughts on this one. To be honest, this one is really cool, but they did just make their own VTubing model, didn't they? Regardless, the updated model really brings Twitch up. It may seem like nothing is really happening until you look at what Twitch actually looks like in League of Legends. Then you can really start appreciating this one. This one was then followed by Swain, who also looks really cool, although a little bit younger than I would expect. And then we got Ornn and Volibear, neither of whom unfortunately got their own trailers. Here, Ornn just looks cool, and Volibear looks a bit stretched. Like, his neck looks a bit longer, doesn't it? But this brings us to the latest additions to Legends of Runeterra. We got Nilah. Again, Nilah is a newer champion, so she is nearly the same. But she was followed by Vladimir, who honestly looks amazing. Everything on this one is an upgrade. The red coat resembles the Crimson Colt. The spikes on his sleeves were dulled to represent the Immortal Bastion. And on his neck, you can see the Camavoran brooch. Because, of course, if you know his lore, you would know that Vladimir is a very distant uncle of Viego. Which is why Vladimir's brooch matches Viego's blade. And even when it comes to Vladimir's very young and smooth Wild Rift look, just like what happened to Thresh, here we also got a story reason why he looks younger here. You see, Vladimir also got his own trailer, where he arrived in the Immortal Bastion as an old Hemomancer, but then he drained Swain's guards to make himself younger, which would very much be in line with his story. So even here, Wild Rift explains why Vladimir looks younger. What I do not understand, however, is the sound design of the trailer. I'll give you a quick sample, so just focus on the fact that there are absolutely no voices, no screaming, and only like 10% of the sounds are there. Everything else is silent. And lastly, we got to the newest addition, which is Hecarim, who only arrived like a week ago. I know that some people will not be happy about this one, because again, this is a case of censorship. Hecarim did have skulls and bones on his armor, so they had to be removed. Which is exactly what happened in League's splash art, as well as some of the censorship in Legends of Runeterra. But still, the new design brings in some upgrades. First of all, compared to his old design and oh god, he came out in 2012. The new armor looks a lot more Camavoran. It looks like it came from Viego's army, which you can tell by the fact that Hecarim also has a Kamavoran brush. That's right, most people didn't notice it because everyone was focusing on Vladimir. But if you have a look at Hecarim's belt, you can see a very similar design. And again, that's because Hecarim also comes from Kamavor. Now, when it comes to him losing the skull on his helmet, I'm kinda indifferent on that one. The new helmet looks just as cool. Though I have to say, I approve him losing the skull on his chest plate. Honestly, that one didn't really make sense anymore because it didn't look like a part of the Kamavoran army. Especially since Kamavor is more about a draconic design. With that said, I think the highlight of the new design is the glaive. You can actually see a horse carved into it, which obviously represents the riders of the Iron Order. It is such a small detail, but it makes this so cool. But there you have it, some of the cool designs from Wild Rift and Legends of Runeterra that make champions better. At least in most cases. Have you looked at the League of Legends designs? There are still a few we haven't mentioned. For example, the new cool design for Corki. But of course, as always, there is a limit to how much you can save the original League of Legends design. That's why Yi's redesign is so drastic, and while Nidalee had to leap a mile to get something good together. But at the end of all of this, I'm just happy that Gragas looks at least a little bit semi-realistic now.